Welcome back to our series on workflow automation. If I had to identify the most important thing about iPhora Automate, I would say it's the ability for business users to create a workflow process completely on their own. That was the main design goal from day one. Of course, that was not an easy goal to achieve. Business users may be the experts when it comes to understanding their company's operations, but most of them have little direct experience with process automation, and certain terms and concepts need to be understood first. And when it finally comes together for a person, they begin to look at the world in a new way. They now have a process-oriented mindset, which is exactly what is needed for a business to grow and scale up, because it's all about the process. In today's discussion, we're going to examine an existing workflow application to learn about forms, grids, and processes, and how they work together to automate a business task. Let's start with the scenario. A business named Acme Universal Garage Doors. Their first automation project was to convert one part of their sales process into an online workflow using iPhora Automate. Let's take a look at the original three-step process, which used to be done entirely with spreadsheets and email. First, a sales rep visits the customer, measures the door size, and works with the customer to define all aspects of the installation, including model, color, and the number of remote controls. This results in an RFQ, a request for quotation. Then the RFQ moves on to the sales manager, who makes sure that everything was completely filled in and nothing is missing. Finally, it moves to an installation specialist who prepares a binding quote on behalf of Acme. When automating a process, everything starts with the data, which represents all the information needed for a particular process. In iPhora Automate, data is displayed, organized, and saved using a form. The creation of a form usually begins with simply making a list of all the information that is needed. Each piece of information that needs to be entered into the form is called a field. For this workflow, that would include things like name, address, garage door model, size, color, and anything else that is needed to prepare a quote for garage door installation. In addition to fields, you may also want users to upload files and images. These types of objects are called uploaders. Once you have a list of fields and uploaders, you use iPhora App Builder to create an online form. You do this by dragging field objects from the palette on the left into the workspace on the right, and then setting their properties of those objects. The ones that represent fields and uploaders are called widgets, and App Builder provides a large number of types, including regular text fields, number fields, and date-time fields, as well as uploaders and combo boxes, which are simply drop-down selection lists. After dragging a widget into the form, you can set its properties by double-clicking. For most widgets, the essential properties are the widget name and label, the label being what the user will see as the title of the field. So now that we've seen how a form looks in App Builder, let's see what it looks like when a user actually tries to fill it in. Here is the same form as a typical user would see it. This one is already filled in, and it is currently on step 2. Here is the main body of the form. This is where the user would interact with the fields in the form to fill it out. When the user is done working on the form, the buttons at the top provide the completion options for the user. These buttons can be customized for each step. And now let's scroll down to see the rest of the form. Here we see the 2 uploaders that were included in this form: an image uploader and the file uploader. So now that we have a form, how does a user create a new workflow using a form? And how does a user access an existing workflow? This is done with a grid. Here is the final published version of the grid that shows documents created with the RFQ form. It provides a way to list, sort, and filter documents so that a specific document can be found quickly. You can open a document by clicking. And there is usually a set of buttons at the top to create a new document using the associated form and access the app settings. Now let's take a look at the same grid in App Builder. As you can see, each column corresponds to a field in the associated form. And the list of available fields is shown here. You simply drag a field from this list into the workspace and it becomes a new column. This section at the top is used to define the buttons that appear at the top of the grid. So now that we have a form and a grid, what about the business logic that makes it work? In other words, what about the process? A process determines how a workflow document moves from one step to the next. Here is the original three-step RFQ process we talked about earlier. We have rewritten it as a flowchart. Next, we expand this into a more detailed flowchart so that we can fully define all of the options available on each step. Notice that each step has an assigned performer, who is the person assigned to doing that step. The purpose of using a flowchart is to help account for all the different situations that might arise during the processing of the workflow, and that includes providing options for handling errors and mistakes. Here is the same process as implemented in iPhora App Builder. The three main steps appear as large rectangles that are called task nodes. These are dragged in from the node palette on the left and connected using the mouse. In this version of the process, we have included some notification nodes, which are used to inform users when a workflow has moved to a step that needs their attention. Each node has a set of properties which can be accessed by double-clicking. For example, when we open the first task node, we can view and edit its properties, which includes a task name, a description, and an assigned performer. There are also action buttons that determine what options are available to the performer on each step. So now that we know about the forms, grids, and processes, the final question is, how do we connect them together? This is done using the Layout view in App Builder as shown here. The forms, grids, and processes are represented by app blocks, which you drag in from the palette and connect together. Let's zoom in so we can see this better. In this example, we have a form that is connected on one side to a grid and to a process on the other side. And notice that the grid is connected to the user app block, which means that when a user opens this app, the first thing they see is the grid. And that's all there is to it. Working in App Builder just involves selecting objects from a palette, dragging them into position, and setting their properties. When it is all assembled and working, we call it a workflow application, or just app for short. When it's published, it's automatically rolled out to the desired users. If you would like to know more about business process automation and iPhora solutions, just visit iPhora.io.